What is up, Watch fam? I am Christian from Theo and Harris, and welcome to Rant&h. Happy Monday. Today we're going to be talking about Bulgari and how I'm extremely impressed by them recently and their Octo Finissimo. So before we get into that, we'll do a quick wristwatch check. I am wearing my first watch ever, my Rolex reference 1601 with a beautiful blue dial, white gold bezel, very good case. This is one of my favorite watches of all time, as a watch itself, and then of course for me so emotionally. As you guys know, I'm a disgusting 1601 fan. Like I'm obsessed with reference 1601s, and we are actually going to be stocking one tomorrow, along with 4 or 5 other watches, some Tudor, Omega. So check them out tomorrow, 7 a.m. on the Theo and Harris shop. There's going to be some really amazing stuff. So even if you're not in the market to buy anything, check it out, because at least you'll get some watch porn photos. But that's it. Let's get into today's episode. Okay, so Baselworld was a while back. You know, we're looking kind of in retrospect now, and obviously there are still things to talk about. And frankly, I'm kind of upset that I didn't talk about this earlier, because this to me was very worthy of conversation, real conversation. And this is the Bulgari Octo Finissimo. The Octo is a Genta design, and it's been around for a while. But this is not a reissue. It's not a throwback. This is, to me, a very intelligent progression of this watch's, kind of like lifespan. It's not, hey, let's remake the old one, or hey, let's remake the old one with these 3 changes. This just makes perfect sense. This seems like a more intelligent, more refined, and more, watch focused watch, like a grandson of the original. So I'm a big fan of the fundamental principle that they're not just pulling from the past and stealing, rather improving. And that to me is huge. But let's get into the watch for, let's talk about some finishing, and then we'll go into movement and everything. So it's manufactured out of titanium. And I love alternative metals. I love stainless steel as much as the next guy, because stainless steel is, the standard. But I do appreciate, like, for example, when F. P. Journe did the Chronometra Blue and Tantalum, I was like, wow, that's really, really interesting. It's not a precious metal, but it's an alternative metal. And I was, okay, wow, that's a little extra thing. Not only is it a thing that's extra, but it changes the watch. I mean, the Tantalum, for example, had this really gray, blackish kind of color that was totally different than stainless steel. I mean, literally completely different. This titanium as well. It's actually very much like tantalum. Of course, the treatment to the titanium, it was sandblasted, so that will obviously change the aesthetic. It gives it a very matte, but still kind of like almost gradient and textured finish, which is, I mean, to me, the finishing is beautiful, but still, I think that the color fundamentally of the titanium here is just so much more, like, I don't want to say decadent, but I want to say like cold, maybe, cold and rich in many ways, and interesting. So the metal itself and the finishing of it together make for a very oddball kind of watch. And I'm very interested in seeing anything that's oddball, that's executed well at this price point, which is about $12,000. I absolutely love the design here of particularly, yes, the bracelet, but particularly where a lug kind of meets a bezel. You have, I mean, 3 or 4 different, like, really distinct shapes going on. But because they are so flat, and thin, it's not so embellished. It doesn't look like a pyramid, because that's what it would do. But this watch is incredibly thin, and we'll get to that in a second. So these changes in shapes and height are so small, but to me they make a very interesting and elaborate aesthetic. So right off the bat, we have a titanium case with a fully integrated bracelet and a sandblasted finish. So right there you have a very interesting start. A great kind of canvas for which now you can either make a watch or make a really, truly wonderful watch. Let's go into the dial for a second. I love that the dial is matte and done in a color very, very similar but complementary to the bracelet. But what changes it the most is the texture. Although it is matte like the bracelet, it doesn't have that gradient sandblasted feel. So it does make a very conservative pop, and I think that that's really wonderful. Further, the choice of numerals at 12 and 6, they are rounded, but they have a very structured feel that makes perfect sense with the rest of the aesthetic so far. So now that I've walked you through the case material, the integrated bracelet, the dial configuration, which I think is great, and then the finishing on both the case and the dial, and how it kind of complements each other extremely well. Now let's move on to the most important part of this watch, the part that to me makes this watch not just great or not just good, but miraculous. This is the ultra thin watch right now. This watch threw Piaget off from the top, coming in at 2.23 millimeters as opposed to 2.3 millimeters, I believe. This is the new thinnest watch of its kind. And what I think is particularly interesting, it is automatic and it's powered by a very small and beautiful platinum micro rotor. If you take a step back and look at the movement construction as a whole, I think you'll be very interested. If you put that next to, let's say, Patek Philippe, or you put it next to so many other brands, Patek Philippe, Lang & Zone, they all have their individual styles of finishing, these time-only watches. And I think that in this instance, Bulgari has one as well. I mean, this really does not look similar to other pieces. I mean, pull up Lange, pull up Patek, pull up Philippe Dufour, and Bulgari. These are all different executions. And for a company like Bulgari, someone who's not taken very seriously in the watch world up until recently, and showing that they actually are doing something their way, and they're doing it very, very well, is super interesting. This is not generic. Not only did they design, develop, and manufacture this movement in-house, they claim that it's not going to be sold off to other companies to kind of mitigate any sort of losses or anything like that, or to kind of try to meet up the bottom line. Obviously, designing and constructing a movement on your own is an extraordinarily expensive project. I mean, that's why so many brands just don't do it. The return isn't there, and unless you have such a big name and you can demand such big money, there's no return. But Bulgari has done it. So now let me review again so far what we've talked about. Not only is this watch constructed out of an alternative metal, titanium, but I think the case and bracelet design is extremely interesting. Although, yes, it definitely does pull from Genta past designs. That's just how it is. The designer is the designer, and that's the things that he enjoys. But I think it does it in a very kind of unique way. Further, to me, the sandblasting finish is not only rare, but it is beautiful. I think it adds a very interesting and sporty and steel and kind of like rough finish to a very thin and very elegant watch. It is not easy to make such a thin watch look, sporty. Yes, the Audemars Piguet and the Patek Philippe, the Nautilus and the Royal Oak were sports watches and they were ultra thin. But I mean, this is just about as close to paper as we can get. And yet the aesthetic still has, from the finishing, from the design and everything, a very kind of like rough feel. And I really appreciate that meeting of worlds. And then at its core, it proves that it's not a one-trick pony or a two-trick pony. You have, this really beautiful and technically proprietary and aesthetically kind of proprietary movement. This ultra thin, powered by a platinum rotor. This is a very, very serious piece. Finally, its case measuring at 40 millimeters is extremely doable. I think that it probably wears larger than like a GMT, for example, but still, they did not make this a massive watch that really kind of ruins it for everybody. So to kind of wrap up my thoughts on the watch itself, I think they've done an absolutely wonderful job. I think that they've basically hit every mark and at a price at like $12,000 or $13,000 that is extremely aggressive. You're talking well below 15202, Audemars Piguet, Royal Oak. You're talking about a price range which really isn't far from a two-tone Submariner. And then you have a much more interesting and technically progressive watch. And I think that that's a really wonderful asset. My one aesthetic beef I have with it is, in the photos that I've seen, the color comes off two ways. One, in the really well-lit professional shots, it comes off very light, which I much more prefer, and then in other wrist shots, it comes off very, very dark. So I'm much more of a fan of the lighter color. It almost has this heather gray kind of color that is much more close to steel, and to me, really, really stunning. The dark charcoal isn't bad, I just much prefer the heather gray. That's my one issue that I could see having with the watch in the metal, but apart from that, I think that everything really around this is just really, really stunningly done. My other major qualm with not the watch, but Bulgari right now, and let me start off by saying huge props, wonderful job. If anyone from Bulgari is watching this, if you've watched any other episodes, I'm very, very critical. I hate a lot of things. This is a wonderful watch. It demonstrates that you're taking your job very, very seriously. I think you're playing a long game with this company. You're not trying to make a quick buck. And this watch very well might not be a very profitable watch for you compared to what you could be making in shilling to people. But instead, you're doing a wonderful job. So great. But since you are not just a watch company, since you are a jewelry company and all of these fragrances and all of these other things, I really do recommend, to bring it back to social media, make some accounts, particularly on Instagram, for Bulgari watches. Without question. I, as a consumer that really wants to see your watches and see your process and see you dedicate a lot of time and money to these watches, I don't want to see ads for fragrances at all. And I'm probably not going to follow you because I know that your content is mostly made up of fragrances and jewelry. Not interested. But for those people who are you're trying to build equity in their kind of hearts and their respect, right, in this watch community, you need to speak to them specifically. One account, one piece of content for a company with such a wide reach of products doesn't work, in my opinion at least. You're never going to get real watch respect, which you're obviously looking for because you're not shilling shit. You're never going to get it, I think, with the account that you have right now. But if you create the separate account that watch people can follow and write more articles about and respect more and really kind of just drool over and drool over and drool over, and truthfully, even if it's not the watch bloggers, just clients, a 45-year-old man that is your client is not going to want to follow you on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever if you're posting about women and fragrances half the time or 3/4 of the time. So I really do recommend you double down and come to understand and execute on this new idea of communicating your new mindset about watches and how you're taking it very, very seriously. You're a record holder. This watch deserves serious respect, probably more respect than most of the stuff out there right now. So tell us why and tell us often. So that's what I recommend. Overall, wonderful watch. I'm super glad to be giving a great review to somebody who maybe a couple years ago wouldn't have deserved a great review. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching Rant&h. Do not forget to check out the watches in the watch shop at theoandharris.com tomorrow morning, because although I love Bulgari, vintage is always better. Period.